Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. I know it's a really busy day. Um, in my reading over the past week, I came across some interesting messages that really inspired me, so I want to pass them along, and hopefully some of it will inspire you. When I was a kid, and I don't know if I was being precocious or a wise guy, or maybe some of both, when we got to the 4 questions, I used to say, hey, these are 5 questions. Manish Tana Halayla Zeh, how come you're not counting that one? That's a question too. And as we, and that objection faded from view, and then a couple decades later, I ran into some commentary, and I found out that the commentary wasn't new. It's been around for 1,000 or 2,000 years. That it wasn't necessarily a question, but manish, because the word why is this night. The word why is lama in Hebrew. I could have said lama nishtana halayla zeh, but manishtana could mean how different this night is. So it's almost banal to say that this Seder is going to be different from all other Seders we've ever had. So I wanted to focus on 2 ways that it's going to be different, and how perhaps we can use that as an opportunity to do things or explore things that we don't usually do in the Seder. The 2 tacks I want to take are physical and spiritual, although both of them have spiritual answers, obviously. The physical is that we're going to be alone or close to alone. And that's going to be very strange. I know for us and our family, it will be the smallest Seder. I think it's the smallest Seder I've ever attended in my entire life. I'm in my early 60s. Last year we had around 20 for both Seders, which is the way we usually have it. So what kind of an opportunity do we have when we're alone? Where are my notes here? I want to start off with talking about individual Judaism. So the 2nd verse in the book of Numbers, in Bamidbar, says you should take a census. But the language is very weird. The Hebrew language actually says Se'u et Rosh, which means lift up the head, which is particularly strange because Hebrew's got a whole bunch of words for the verb to count, right? Let's see, limna, lifaked, lift up the head. And some of the commentaries say that the reason for that is that while Hashem is recognizing that we are important as a group, Hashem is also recognizing our individuality. There used to be that phrase, when things started becoming computerized back in the 60s, some of us might remember that some of us protesting, we're not a number, we're a name, not a number. And we have it's so strong today that in Judaism, we have the idea when we count dominion, some people say not 1, not 2, not 3. And we do that to remember that we're not just a bunch of 10 people, but we're also 10 individuals. And while saying not 1, not 2, not 3 may seem silly, it's a reminder to ourselves that each of us is a whole person. We're not just 1/10 of a minion. But there's something even deeper about that. We know according to traditional thought, the Torah has 600,000 letters. Not exactly, but traditionally, on some sort of metaphysical level, the Torah has 600,000 letters, and if just 1 letter is missing, the entire Torah is pasul, is invalid. And there's a comparison to that to the 600,000 Jews that were at Sinai. And the comparison is that if 1 individual Jew is missing, then the entire group, the entire Klal Yisrael, the entire congregation of Israel suffers because of that. We can't have anybody missing in action. So the underlying message of those 2 things are that each of us is an essential part of God's plan. The idea is that God wouldn't, just as God wouldn't bother sticking in an extra letter in the Torah, God wouldn't bother creating a person who was superfluous. We are an essential part of the plan. We have a unique mission, each of us. You are the only you that exists in the universe. And our task in the world is to figure out what our mission is and then to go do it. So where does that leave us at the Seder? Where that leaves us is as follows. We need to seize the opportunity that we have. Perhaps a way of looking at it is that Judaism is so often about community, which actually I think is a unique strength of the Jewish people, right? When somebody is hurting in Yerushalayim, we all feel it. All the way down to locally, the requirement that we need a minyan to do much of our service in order to read the Torah or to say Kaddish. And yet, perhaps this is a chance to remember, as important as community is, so are we as individuals. So for those of us who will not be Zooming into a Seder, and for those of us who are in very small Seders, this is the message I want to give to you, that there is a silver lining here, that by conducting the Seder at home, we can explore in new depth what we as individuals are capable of achieving within the context of the larger Jewish community. Time, we may be forced into the constricting narrow straits of the discomfort that we may have of speaking and leading a Seder where we're normally quiet and just passive listeners and taking things in from other people. I'm sure all of us have been at Seders where there's a lot of smart people and they're saying all kinds of things, and it's a joy to just sit and listen to some of the discussion. In this Seder, it's time for us to step up and do it. No one can do the work of leading a Seder. For those of us who are in tiny 1 or 2 person Seders, no one can do the work of leading a Seder except for us. We need to frame the questions. We need to suggest the themes. We need to offer inspiring interpretations. We need to hear our own still small voice that is within us. We need to give this still small voice much needed airtime. If until now we've been the passive participants in a Seder, this night will be different because there's no one else to shield us from our responsibilities, from our dreams, from our inadequacies. As I mentioned in a shir last week, the Talmud goes so far as to say that even if a person is alone, at the Seder, he has to ask himself the 4 questions. This is our inner dialogue, the deep questions that we so often maybe don't have time to think about so much, that we leave silenced or unarticulated. This is the Seder where we need this Jewish narrative within us to come out. So one of the Pesach is about slavery. One of the things that we should learn, that we should not be enslaved to, is our pre-existing notions of what a Seder should be. We all have notions of how a good Seder is, often formed in our childhood, and we need to go beyond those and be creative and have and listen to our voices inside to guide us where we're going to go. To rephrase, I can't remember if I already said this, the Chassidic idea, to rephrase it again or to repeat it again, while it may be that this situation is forced upon us, we have to remember that our response to it is up to us. So we need to seize the opportunity. We need to discuss new ways where we can talk about what we might be slaves to. Are we slaves to peer pressure, to society, to materialism? Or as my children used to remind me, or to the internet, guilty. How can we pass over them to freedom? Which leads to the spiritual part of how this year may be different. I mentioned this briefly also last week in this year. The Meiri says that the hardest part of the Seder is to see ourselves as though we personally left Mitzrayim. So the question is, how do you do that? I can't, and I think the Meiri's right. I'm not sure that I've ever done that. I just, growing up in America, the most affluent society that has ever existed in the history of the planet, and growing up as a Jew in America, where, except for Israel, this is the freest Jews have been in 2,000 years, it's hard to feel oppressed. So I think here's the key, is that, and yet we are obviously in our own Mitzrayims with our quarantines and with our tiny Seders. So here's the key. The story we tell on Seder night, whether it be to ourselves, whether it be to our children, or to future generations sometime after that, it includes our own narrative today and what we're going on during this whole situation today. And so we educate ourselves to take this paradigm of Yetzias Mitzrayim, and which is the ultimate story of hope and redemption, and bring them into our own lives. The Torah tells us, "You shall tell the children on that day." So let's get down to bottom line. What do we tell our children this year? And of course, by children, I mean tell ourselves, or tell our spouses or future generations. So I've run into some essays that talk about what we tell our children. And this is what we tell our children. And again, by children, I mean ourselves and all of us. We tell our children that this was a Pesach where maybe the elderly couldn't attend, or if we're the elderly, then we tell our children that this was the year that our children and grandchildren couldn't attend. But we redoubled our efforts to connect with them both before and afterwards. We'll tell our children that although we were alone for Pesach, and though it was lonely and strange, it was also incredibly meaningful, and that the bonds of support that we offered each other leading up to the Seder is what kept us strong during the Seder night. We'll tell our children that this was a year where we, in the most affluent society that ever existed, actually fulfilled the mitzvah of feeling oppressed and of sincerely hoping for a redemption speedily in our days. Again, speaking personally, I know that's something that I've never felt so much as I'm sure I will feel tomorrow night at the Seder. We'll tell our children of the doctors and the nurses and the EMTs and the paramedics and all the healthcare workers who fought on the front lines, saving lives every day while risking their own lives, just as the Jewish midwives did as they saved babies in Mitzrayim. And finally, most importantly, we'll tell our children that this is the Pesach where we looked the Malach HaMavis in the eye, the angel of death in the eye, as he, as he banged on the door. And if not our door, our friend's door, our neighbor's door, our parents' door, our friends from New York to B'nai Barak, we told the angel of death, get lost. That they had better skip over our house this year. Because this year we are choosing life over death. We're choosing hope over despair, and we're choosing faith over fear. The story is still unfolding, and now is the time to create it with our own lives and for future generations. Whew. All right, that's my message. I wish all of you a very safe and meaningful Seder this year. as my own great-grandmother, who was born in the 1880s, used to say, have a Zisen Pesach, have a sweet Pesach. May our redemption come soon, speedily in our day. Chag Sameach, everybody.
Amen. Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach. I've just,
Sameach.
no, I haven't. All right, I've just stopped the recording, I think. There we go.
Chag Sameach.